speaker is one that's going to challenge your thinking. Sometimes we need to just roll up our sleeves, get our pens and notebooks out and get ready for a speaker who will challenge us in our style of leadership. Andy Stanley is going to be speaking on the upside of tension. I don't know if you think there's an upside of tension, but there is. There's a way to manage it that will make your organization and your leadership situation far more effective. He's the senior pastor of North Point Alliance Church. He's a repeat summit speaker. He's an outstanding communicator. I know you're going to be challenged and inspired by what you're going to hear. Let's welcome our next speaker, Andy Stanley.
Como líder, nunca trate de ser justo. Creo, esta es solo mi opinión, creo que la justicia terminó en el jardín del Edén. Nada ha sido justo desde entonces y no debemos intentarlo. No piense en términos de justicia. Esto es importante. No piense en términos de equilibrio. Bueno, la última vez lo dejamos. No piense en términos de equilibrio. Piense en términos de ritmo. En el ritmo de su organización hay un tiempo en que ciertas cosas pesan en gran medida y hay un ritmo, un tiempo o temporada en su organización donde usted debe alejarse. Hay temporadas en nuestras organizaciones en las que debemos ser sistemas. Hay momentos en el ritmo de nuestra organización que tenemos que ir con la flexibilidad, con cosas nuevas, cosas piloto, flexibilidad, cosas nuevas, asumir riesgos, perder algo de dinero. Esta no es una decisión que usted toma como líder. Esto es algo que aprendemos a poner atención y a tomar decisiones a la luz del ritmo de la organización. No tratando de ser justos, no tratando de ser equilibrados, pero prestando atención al ritmo de la organización. En la iglesia hay tiempos que necesitamos más música que predicación. Hay tiempos en el ritmo de la iglesia donde se necesita más predicación que cantar. Hay un tiempo en el ritmo de nuestro mundo donde necesitamos construir en nuestro edificio un espacio para los niños. Y existe un tiempo en el ritmo de vida de nuestras organizaciones donde necesitamos construir orfanatorios en diferentes partes del mundo. No se trata de equilibrio, no se trata de justicia, se trata de, como líder, poner atención a los ritmos de nuestra organización, las emociones de nuestra organización, permitiendo que la atención siempre esté en la mesa y aprender bajo el liderazgo del Espíritu Santo a tomar decisiones bajo la luz de lo que sucede dentro de la organización en cuestión. En conclusión, si ven en sus notas, les he dado una especie de declaración final. Vamos a cerrar esto. Como líder, una de las cosas más valiosas que puede hacer por su organización es diferenciar entre tensiones que su organización siempre tendrá que manejar contra problemas que tendrán que solucionar. Y esta es la promesa que les hago. Si los identifica y los apalanca, estos problemas, estas tensiones se volverán parte de su historia y se convertirán en parte del progreso de su organización. En algunos casos, que su compañía suba al siguiente nivel y en otros casos, mantener relevante a su organización dependerá de su habilidad como líder para vivir con estas tensiones, vivir con estas preguntas y problemas sin resolver y liderar a su equipo a través de estas. Porque al final del día, existe una tensión que me beneficia a mí y una tensión que beneficia a su organización. Muchas gracias a todos por permitirme estar con ustedes. Dios les bendiga.
Well, I told you that was a session that would make you think. To understand tension and to know whether we have to fix it or just manage it, it's a concept that will help us in our personal life and in our organizations. As I was listening to what Andy Stanley had to say, my mind was going to personal, extended family situations where I'm thinking there's tension that could be managed much better and perhaps unfixable situations. I don't know if that's your story too. But if you open your notebook and your process tool, you'll see the very first question asks you just to identify tensions that need to be managed in your life. We're going to just give you 1 minute just to personally reflect and to write some of those down. This is not something you will necessarily share with others. You can if you choose to. But just take a moment and just identify those tensions in your life that perhaps you can manage better. Thank you for doing that. What I'm going to ask you to do now is to turn to the groups that you've been working in through the day and work on questions 2 and 3. These are going to direct you to the tensions that you might need to manage in the organisation that you're from. They're going to ask you to just jot down some thoughts and then to share with each other We're going to give you about 15 minutes, so don't feel you have to rush. Make sure everyone in the group has an opportunity to share what's on their heart, but discuss it together and unpack the learnings from this session in the context of your organisation or the group that you have come with. Why don't you turn to the groups now, and you've got the next 15 minutes. I want to thank you all for being so engaged in that process. It makes such a difference when we have the collaboration of colleagues and we have different ideas. You know, a good thing to do right now would be just to circle one thing in your process tool. Just one takeaway, something that you're going to action or pursue further as you leave this summit. Now, you can do that as you move your chairs around and as you gather, and just come back to the front. And what I'm going to do is just hand over to our host, who will dismiss us for lunch and just let us know all the details of where we need to go and what we need to do. Thank you.
All right, Karen, let's talk about what you just did in that session with Andy Stanley. When you walked up and you introduced, and you actually challenged the audience right away. Why would you do that?
Well, typically this could be a session. It might be after lunch. It might be a difficult time of the day. I wanted to engage them to actually sit up straight and think, right, I have to work and I have to think. Some sessions they are just going to be asked to connect with their heart, but this wasn't one of them. And so I felt like the expectation, without being over the top, the expectation at the beginning has to be clear so they know what to expect.
Now, you gave a little bit of a nod to what the topic was. Is that always a good thing to do? Or do you want to, sometimes we worry about giving away the message before the message is given.
Yeah, true. And I think, you know, sometimes you do it better than others. But I think it's good to give it.
And you did it great that time.
Well, thank you. But I think sometimes you can give away too much. I don't want to do a pre-runner and give away all these points. They've also got their process tool. They've got their notebooks. They've also come because they've looked at the speakers and all their history, so I don't need to say too much about him. Some of your sessions actually, when you're facilitating, will have bumpers, and they'll have grabs of the ministry of some of these speakers. So make sure you watch those so that you know how much you have to say, because usually it's very little.
Yeah. The facilitation at the end of the message, you started personal. Was that for a reason? Or, you know, there's two components, more of a personal and then you turned into groups. Let's unpack that a little bit. Why did you choose that direction and start there?
Well, we're thinking that all of our delegates, we want them to personally engage. So if I don't do it, then I'm not modeling it to them.
Right.
They don't want to hear my entire history or all of my problems. You know, it's not about unpacking it, but it is about letting them know it's touched me. And I felt that was a little vulnerable to say, well, I've got family tensions. Some people would not want to share that openly, but I think it's actually a human condition, so why not? And I think when you choose to be a facilitator, you have to choose a little vulnerability, because you'll be someone who will connect much better with your delegates if they think you can be real with them. I didn't want to go into detail, and we did it quickly, but...
Because it's really not about you.
It's not about me, but it's about me modeling openness and vulnerability.
Yeah. I thought it was great, and then you turn it over to the group. Just an aside, where are you at on stage during this whole facilitation time? What you know, do you cue it up? You walk off stage and you come back up later, go out for coffee or anything like that?
Well, I could go out for coffee because I've watched the sessions a couple of times before. But you know what? I hold the moment on the stage for the entire facilitation time. So when I've walked up there after the speaker has finished, I don't leave the stage until I hand over to the host. It could be 20 minutes, Larry. So what I do practically is I get a high stool or a bucket chair, something that is comfortable for me, and I'll put it to the side of the stage. I'll lead them in the facilitation moment, and I'll just step to the side where I'm not obvious, and I'll just relax and watch the audience, because I've got to read the room. If I send them away for a 1-minute personal reflection, then that's only 1 minute. It's not 15 seconds, it's 60 seconds. You have to do what you say. If you say a minute, make sure it's a minute. And then, but for the 15 minutes that I gave them to talk in groups, I've got to watch that.
Yeah.
You know,
so you're the timekeeper?
Well, the producer, you'll work with him, and I'd like to have some communication with him. So sometimes I'll sneak to the side and we'll talk. If we may see that after 7 minutes, everyone's really restless. For whatever reason, they may not have connected like we had planned they would. And if I'm not sitting in a place where I can read the room, I'll miss that, and it can get unwieldy. So I'll stay there, and if I saw that happening, I would speak to the producer and say, hey, shall we cut this a few minutes short? And if we agree, we move forward with that.
So just because it's on plan and you wrote it down doesn't mean you have to stay with that?
No, I would say you'd want to stay with it, but there are going to be exceptions. And if you're not reading the room and not holding the moment, I've seen this done, and I've done it differently myself, and I think if they see the facilitator in charge, as so to speak,
right.
Would you say that, in charge or in...
Yeah. You're driving the bus.
Driving the bus, the bus driver doesn't hop off at the stop and then get back in. He stays with the driver's seat, and I think your audience and your delegates relax a lot more.
Yeah. One thing, it's hard when you turn, I think we all have this fear, we turn a crowd loose to talk. How are you ever going to get them back? Do you do you yell? Do you blow on the mic? Hey, everybody! Now it's how do you do that?
I think you work really closely with your producer on this one, and the lighting of the auditorium. If we are releasing the crowd to a 15-minute discussion, I would typically bring the lights up a little, and then with a minute to go, you could just start to dim those lights, and they'll get an idea something's going to happen. If you have background music playing, often I'll put a CD on the back, not with songs on it, but just with background music. Have your keyboard player playing quietly. It just creates comfort for those awkward moments. Some groups will have awkward moments. If there's a little bit of music playing, that helps. But when I'm about to come back up on stage, that all fades to nothing. The other thing I've done in some auditoriums that are a little smaller is I'll actually take the mic and give them a minute warning. So I'll just say, it's been a great time talking. In 1 minute, I'm going to ask you to turn around, and we're going to finish off this session. Because what happens is the leader who's leading the group will hear you, because they've got their leader mode on. They're knowing they're guiding the discussion. And then 1 minute later, I will just begin to say, thank you for doing that. And they've had that pre-warning that they're going to come back again.
So where do you get your ideas from? If you're going to facilitate, I know you've watched the message, as a good facilitator will do. We'll spend time reviewing it, watching the speaker, but where do you get your ideas? You probably have the handbook, right, or the guest notebook that has the questions, but how do you figure that out? How does that all piece together? You
mean how the flow of things? Or?
Yeah. How do you, or where do you get your ideas from? The actual questions, or maybe some background?
Okay. After the summit, every year there is a team in the United States that put together this process tool, and so they spend time crafting and recrafting and recrafting. So the tools and the questions are provided to you, and if you haven't seen them yet, you need to talk to your producer about them, because they haven't. There are facilitation notes that you'll be given. They're sent out, so they'll give you the last 2 minutes of the session that you're facilitating in a transcript. You'll have some questions placed there, and then you'll have intros given to you, introductions for speakers.
So these are kind of like a lifeline.
Yeah, they are. And there's a place called Summit Central that you need to ask your team about, and they will direct you to that, and all this is posted for you. You don't have to create it. It's given to you, and what you do is you just make it your own.
Okay.
And I would suggest you don't read the notes for introductions, but become familiar with them. So then you just share them from your own personality and your own style.
And there's one last thing. I noticed that you didn't talk a whole lot. You just kind of set up the next question and turn people loose. I've noticed from time to time people will feel the need to talk more. And how do you keep that in check so it's not about you, it's more about the participant?
I think what you need to do is keep the big picture in mind, that they actually come to the summit to hear 8 world-class speakers and to let those speakers impact their heart. While I might be an amazing person, and I'm sure you are too, it's not about us, but our role is to guide and lead them, being impacted by the speakers who they've heard on the screen, and hopefully who they've believed. It's almost a live experience. So there's a balance, Larry. It's a balance between being candid and open and vulnerable, but holding in check the fact that you have to direct them to the content, and to the speakers they've heard, not to you.
That's great.